This is my COVID-19 Impact Response Project on Canada. January 25th, 2020 was the first case ever occurred, and it's in Toronto from China, Wuhan, obviously. February 20th of 2020 was the first case of someone who didn't visit China or have close contact with someone who did. It started from the right side of the country first. Toronto is like right above Michigan. It's mostly actually the bottom half of the country. Public health policy response. Due to the Freedom Convoy protest, essentially a truck driver was unhappy because they often have to go between states, provinces, countries even. So they started honking their horns. It was very annoying. A lot of other truck drivers joined, and some citizens filed lawsuits. It got into the news. It was a big thing. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, evoked the State of Emergency Act.
Fun fact, this act was the replacement for the War Measures Act that was used 3 times, and his father, Pierre Trudeau, evoked the last one.
It was to authorize the federal government to take special temporary measures to protect the safety of the country during a national emergency. Travel restrictions and border measures were imposed. Quarantines were mandatory for travelers and required the use of apps upon entry. Public education campaigns were put out in place to inform people about COVID. Testing capacities was increased, and so were contact tracing efforts. There was an app that allows people to see if you're nearby places where people have COVID. National-wide vaccine plans were put in place to ensure free vaccination for all residents. People on student visa, for example, also benefited from it. The Atlantic Bubble was created. It consists of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island. You could travel freely in between but not outside of it. The province-wide lockdown, consisting of bans on social gathering and closure of non-essential businesses, came into effect in Ontario. In Quebec, however, a curfew of non-essential travels between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. was imposed. A lot of the times, closure were regional, such as cities or school districts. Let's take BC, for example. Although Bonnie Henry imposed restrictions on social gatherings, Vancouver imposed fines, whereas Vancouver Island, Victoria, did not. It wasn't imposed that a school must have online classes, so especially the middle schools, they only gave out homework, and different school districts also reopened in person differently. Mine had the option of hybrid, in-person, or online, whereas some only had the option of in-person or online. In China, you had to show proof of your vaccination, but in certain places in Canada, all you had to do was show a QR code or the actual document that you've gotten your COVID shots. The currently rank I used to go to, you have to show them the QR code, they scan, they approve you, but for places like grocery stores, they don't care. Fiscal policy. The federal government invested some 19 plus billion to help provinces and territories to safely restart their economy. 19.7% of the country's total GDP, which is about 435 billion CAD, was put into efforts of COVID. 2.7% went to health systems for testing, vaccine development, medical supplies, etc. 13.2% went to households and firms, such as wage subsidies, and increased in existing GST credit, goods and service tax. There was a new distinction-based Indigenous Community Support Fund, which was about 3.9% of the country's GDP. Here are some of the stimulus act that Canada did, all of which were direct aid. Emergency response benefit directly to those who lost income, emergency wage subsidy, emergency business account, and one-time payment to seniors or low-income families and child benefits. Monetary policy. The Bank of Canada cut policy interest rate to 0.25% in 2020, launched a large-scale Government of Canada bond, which allows you to purchase a lower long-term interest rate to ensure liquidity. The emergency business account I said before, that is actually an interest-free loan program of $40,000 to $60,000, and you don't actually have to pay back the full amount. So if you pay back the majority of it, then $10,000 to $20,000 will be forgiven. How nice! They maintained a 2% inflation target, but did allow some temporary deviations. Here's the data for pre-COVID economic profiles. During COVID, the government spending was 20 times higher. Post-COVID, government spending did drop by about half. Analysis. During COVID, the country experienced a decrease in aggregate GDP. Investment spending decreased as uncertainty and economic challenges led to fewer investments. Government spending increased significantly during the pandemic to support the economy, business, and individuals. Inflation fluctuated from changes in demand, supply chain disruptions, because you have to start from places like China. If they have restrictions and pause factories, you can't really do anything. And government interventions. The unemployment rate increased as businesses faced closures, layoffs, and economic uncertainties. When the economy showed signs of recovery, there was an increase in aggregate demand. Investment spending had an increase, indicating a higher business confidence and economic activities. Unfortunately, government spending was still pretty high. Inflation increased during the recovery phase, demand rose, and supply chains still struggled to stabilize. Later, when things got better, you could see certain businesses wanting to hire a little more because so many have been laid off. Overall, the aggregate GDP surpassed pre-COVID level, consumer GDP had a positive growth, investment spending surpassed pre-COVID, and there was a small reduction in unemployment. Action plan. The government spending still needs to be stabilized and recovery without leading to an inflationary pressure. Policies need to be implemented to control inflation while still have this economic growth. Action for enhanced recovery. The government could focus on increasing infrastructure spending to stimulate economic growth to create jobs without too much actual output. This would have a multiplier effect on different sectors.
I'm driving here, I sit, cursing my government for not using my taxes to fill holes with more cement.
During lockdown, a lot of people would come outside 7 p.m. sharp. That video was Vancouver, but other places too. They would clap or have some loud noises or play instruments. It is a form of gratitude to the healthcare workers. It's actually a long-term thing. It was really cool.